Good morning, Drumtopia. T minus 30, 29, 28, 27, 26 days and counting. I technically already lost count. Until the big, huge, important, life-altering event. Less than a month from now, Election Madness Day comes to a full, complete culmination. Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Almost Daily Zencast.
This is the Almost Daily Zencast. Hello, and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started.
Hello and namaste, dear listeners, friends of the show, and those of you who came along to try and troll and bait us into debate. Let's bring it. Let's go. I will gladly discuss in a civilized and intellectual fashion any and all aspects of my worldview and global/local political positioning. And it's pretty straightforward, friends. It's really simple. The system being what it is, and pin on the corkboard, friends. We've had many goes, up and downs, and turnarounds types of discussion about what the system is and is not. And welcome aboard. If you're new to the show, you'll catch along to the idea of what the corkboard is. You know the meme with the guy explaining the thing from that show, and it's like making fun of conspiracy theory. Well, I'm making fun of that meme back and forth. We love pattern recognition. Okay? It's part of our human or the human experience and the human biology and the systems, the tools, the mental, sublimated, sometimes not very well self-aware, self-understood tools that we use to evaluate and assess reality around us. The problem is, patterns can be bogus and point us down blind alleys and in wrong directions. Or, as I like to point out, despite what I've been accused of being, I'm actually not a fence sitter. I like to point out that both parties, despite their differences, each suffer from systematic, fundamental, problematic issues because they are two wings attached to one bird, as a metaphor. And for some people, they literally need to look at the picture of a bald eagle with its wings spread open and then paint one of the wings red and one of the wings blue to understand. But maybe sometimes that doesn't even help. It's not that the parties are the same. Don't get derailed. I've never said that. I've been accused of saying that quite often, curiously, by people in both parties. But I assure you, my dearest of friends, I have never said both parties are the same. I said both parties are appendages to the same complex system of many different complex and complicated systems. And therefore, both have corollary or similar yet different and varying problematic issues as expressed through individuals that we may identify as the quote-unquote bad apples. But we all know how ridiculous the bad apple argument goes, or is, or how pointless it gets rendered when you really analyze it. So friends, let's not get too caught up in that. First things first. The parties being what they are, there's no way I can ever endorse anything that's on that ticket with that gentleman at the top. With that pair of gentlemen at the top. Everything that they are viscerally, tangibly, measurably, factually, and I'm not trying to throw any wild or outlandish accusations at them. I'm not trying to hypothesize any imagined evils. And you'll note, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, the comedy here is that that's what they do. They weaponize imaginary, weaponized accusations. But put a pin on the corkboard. I've discussed that before a lot, and we'll be full circle discussing it again. And if you're new, the corkboard is this imaginary collection of interconnected, interrelated ideas that in the moment, in the flow, I would love to maybe get on a sidetrack and get distracted, going on a spiraling out of control discussion about or defining that particular idea or individual cluster of ideas or whatever the thing I just said that the pin on the corkboard statement represents. But rather that I would love to come back to it, or that we've already addressed it in that way. And please do dive deep into the podcast's long history of sporadic, almost daily, but not quite, episodic publications available to you at sprecher.com/Mr. Zeppo. And gather the pins and formulate them in your own collection of figuring out what the pattern is on your own corkboard is the game. It's the gimmick. It's the thing that we do together on this show. So there are many pins on the corkboard about where I have stood regarding Trump. And despite the humorously silly, absurd, and almost always patently wrong, dare I say, habitually false accusations that I've been accused of regarding my thinking, my thoughts, my reasoning, my motivations behind why I would dare ever question, and I choose the word carefully, question Trump, the administrative goals that he apparently seems to represent, whether he understands them himself or not, being a completely separate question, and the people who choose on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year, incident-to-incident basis to continue to support him. And I'm not, and never have I, stooped so low as to do what they do, generally speaking. And of course, I do not believe in absolutist statements. There must be some shining examples of people who didn't fall victim to this trend in a very clear, robust way, but I've yet to meet them. They generally, as a party, and let's be specific, when I say as a party, I mean the vocal political advocates engaging in public discourse. So obviously, there may be plenty of people for which this kind of description is not accurate, because they're not busy broadcasting their opinion and trying to shout down other people and insist that they are the crazy loonies that are dead wrong for all the reasons, and here's their evidence, right? I'm a big believer in public discourse for a purpose, not for meaningless blind alley bullying. Pin on the corkboard. We've discussed that before, and it's related to many recurring themes that we will touch on again. Welcome to the journey, both simultaneously backwards in time, as you, dear audience member, delve deeper and deeper into the multitude of many episodes during the course of the years since I launched the podcast. And please be advised, all of it is very real, very rough and tumble, very raw, very sometimes I lost my train of thinking and don't know how to transition out of it, kind of awkward, but it's radically unscripted and very adamantly my genuine and authentic opinion, presented to you as a podcast, wherein I also, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, it doesn't alter my worldview or my opinion, am presenting myself in the branded identity of the imaginary literary fictional character of a book from a book series that I myself am writing. Because this podcast is a MacGuffin, an article, an ingredient, an element that exists in the podcast, and that the characters have to contend with. They have to listen to it and go, what the F is going on? But I digress. Regardless of the literary fictional part, don't get distracted by that unless you want to go read the books and participate in the collaborative dance that is the journey of slowly developing this book series into a place where hopefully it'll get picked up, discovered, and published, etc. Which may take lifetimes, the rate I'm going now. But the more people read and comment, the more I will be drawn to go there, respond, and engage with the content that already exists. And that will fire synapses in my brain that help me connect the dots to other stuff where I have felt blocked. But I digress. I, as a very real person, who will sometimes dress up and pretend to be a artificial living robot being from a galaxy far, far away in a dimension in parallel to your own, that is now stuck here on your planet with you with no recourse other than to pretend to be one of you. And luckily, I was built to basically, essentially be as flawed as any human is here in this dimension for reasons that would make sense if you visited that dimension, but don't make sense here. And I'm not a real person because I'm a robot, but I digress. I'm sent here to warn you about yourselves and your own folly. And I started with Trump because it was quite bizarre to me when I first arrived that a former cigarette salesman and fake cowboy, although I guess pretend real cowboy, definitely, although I don't think the terminology existed back then when Ronald Reagan was in office and during the course of his career as a film actor and a TV actor and a soap opera actor and a salesman for a major brand of tobacco, cigarettes, etc., 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 leading up to his run into government. But if there had been social media at the time, or if I had been more engaged and of a more like mature age to be professionally involved in some form of public discourse, I would have tried to question, why is this former stage and film mediocre B-list actor becoming the president of the United States of America? I'm sure there were people at the time asking that question, but he was beloved and adored by many, and I get it. It was charming. It was a brilliant choice. Now, many a conspiracy theory exists about the guy, but in hindsight, he was just a guy, and politics is just a thing you can choose to do, especially if you got name power. Name recognition, brand name recognition gets you places. And that's how we ended up with a former pseudo-billionaire. Yes, he's been wealthy his entire life, but he's not really like, Elon Musk level rich, and he's not, who are the top 5? He's not their level. He envies them, right? The reason he sucks up to openly, and this is part of the cognitive dysfunction that I cannot comprehend. At the very first time that it was evident, truly, painfully, undeniably evident, that the man, the myth, the legend, the political aspirant, Donald J. Trump, openly, unsarcastically, genuinely and authentically looked up to and admires, I say present tense because it hasn't stopped, past tense as if I was talking about this back then, going, how can we consider this a viable candidate? This is not a good quality for a viable candidate. This should be disqualifying. Openly admired, figures in world, global, geopolitical positions that qualify them as literal tyrants. Now, it's not new. It wasn't shocking in and of itself if one has been aware of the fact that since the very depths of the Cold War, there's been an effort, obviously, to recruit and cultivate a simpiness, a percentage of support for whatever's going on over there in our former ally turned whatever the F or the relationship is now. And obviously, there are people who will argue till they're blue in the face that the president of that country, known as commonly, and I think still inaccurately, just commonly referenced as Russia. In other words, that's not its official name, right? That he's actually a super sweet And they have their own, he has his own version of he's chosen by God and Jesus himself is ordained that he shall lead the world. Isn't it weird and curious and interesting? To me, since the earliest days of my secular, nonpartisan, and people laugh when I say that, but because they always assume I'm whatever they want to disagree with. Everyone does that. Check your projection, human species. You're really busy doing it. You're projecting on animals as if, yes, listen. I hold the very complicated and nuanced position. Let's go on a crazy tangent. Animals, all life forms are evolving towards personhood. But there is no evidence available to us just yet that they have invented and or think or see the world in such terms as we do. So the projectionary habit is often a toxic one. I was in a discussion recently where I asked someone that I was debating a certain point with regarding how profit in our consumerist-based capitalist society has turned toxic and has led to this inversion of ideals, which is curiously exactly what this person and the community he generally represents will accuse everyone else who disagrees with whatever he's proposing to be the solution, which is often wild. Like, what? You want to do what? You support what notion now? Like, that sounds pretty top-down, oppressive, and dismissive of other human people and their basic ability to not agree with your religious ideological constructs, which are imaginary and entirely made up. But this individual with whom I like to spar, fair play, fair game. I do it on purpose, intentionally, for funsies, and never take it in any way, shape, or form seriously. And though I poke fun at and will barb and jest and play and mock and poke in a brotherly, lovingly fashion, I will never stoop so low as to blatantly, abusively playground bully anyone. The most toxic thing I think I say to people is like, have you considered buying yourself a dictionary? Because it really feels like you don't understand the words you're using. And sometimes I actually just mean it with deep sincerity. This individual was trying to argue with me that profit is some virtuous, altruistic thing that motivates and ensures. Well, they didn't use these words. I'm maybe overanalyzing their intent, but they were defending profit and saying that without the profit motive, we wouldn't have innovation, or that innovation would be much more difficult. I think that while one could argue that is true, and obviously all those who support profit-driven capitalism, who are self-appointed capitalist profiteers, whether you use that in the quote-unquote supposedly good way, or in the, ooh, bad, naughty, shame on you, you shouldn't be doing that kind of way, because, like war profiteers, you're not supposed to be patting yourselves on the back for doing that, right? You're not supposed to be going, yay, war profiteering! I'm so glad that there's a class of people that get away with doing that and have never held to account and just sell horrible things to all parties involved, which lead to the death and suffering of innocent people, including unarmed children. Like, we're not supposed to be cheering that on. And yet here we are, daring to debate the moral class of the moral character and the character content of politicians, whilst with an entire party that is bent over backwards to glorify, defend, and justify a shady, shyster, huckster of a guy that was never really a true billionaire in and of himself out of his own right. Not like a Bezos can truly more. Whatever your feelings may or may not be about Jeff Bezos, he can honestly, legitimately, without blinking, without batting an eye, without being poked fun at by the late night stand-up comics for being factually incorrect, he could say that he's, a true bazillionaire, right? And Trump wants to be in that class of people, and he's not. And I have For the record, I'm not making any factual statement about my opinions about that guy. About that class of person, in theory, I have many concerns. Do I have any personally, angled hate? I get accused of that all the time. Why do you hate so-and-so? Why do you hate Trump? Why do you hate people who support Trump? Why do you hate Christians? Why do you hate rich people? Why do you hate billionaires? I do not. Why do you keep asking me nonsense questions? I have a moral problem with what some of these folks are doing, and what with a lot of people who these folks have nothing in common with are spending a lot of energy defending, which doesn't make any sense. I have moral problems with what seems to be a slowly growing portion of not just the American voting demographic, but the global population. Once you don't worry about measuring by voting eligibility and you just start polling across the planet, there is a growing, deeply concerning movement of hyper-popularized, whitewashed, normalized, paranoia-focused, paranoia-inducing, popularist, right-leaning, often hyper-conservative, pseudo-religious, because it's way off the charts, got nothing to do with what any of the religious teachers authentically originally taught. And I got receipts. I used to argue with this inside the church. Never mind with people outside the church, right? As a Bible thumper, I used to be like, but none of this adds up, you guys. I'm here to prove that because we're all believers, but the more I dig and the more I try to agree with you, the harder it becomes to agree because there's all this evidence. I got excommunicated, officially and unofficially, out of various flavors of Christian churches. And I'm sure I will be the more audience and the more attention the more I am brought to their attention. Because they aren't teaching the teachings of Yeshua, the Christos. He was probably an entheogenic, meditating, yoga-like, yogini type, and they weren't the same sort of thing as what we're dealing with now ethno-religiously. It's a completely different grouping of people. And if he were to come back now, he would probably be held accountable as being Palestinian. So put a pin on the corkboard. That's a whole nother waspness of complicated, right? What if Jesus the actual real living Yeshua Christos came back today? Well, I have a lot of questions with most people who would be kind of chomping at the bit for that to happen aren't ready to deal with. The first one is, and forgive me for spiraling out of control, I know we opened with election countdown, but this is all interrelated in deeply problematic ways, friends, because whatever party you're in, one of the parties has a core of its most rabid base that is wrapped up in an ideology that intrinsically ties a very weird, skewed, tweaked, postmodernly, dystopianly, very distantly unrelated, interpretively derivative thing claiming to be Christ's teachings, which they are not, claiming to be a form of Christianity, which it is not. And then there's Christ's teachings, right, which are completely separate. And they want, they've got an army of people coming in to vote for this. I swear, it's a shame he didn't actually own a used car lot franchise at some point, because I could call him a literal used car salesman. I can't. He's figuratively. He is the reality TV show washed up real estate wannabe that never really became a successful mogul on his own, because look at all that. Look at the factual records and court transcriptions of the cases he's been involved in. And you have to then realize that some people have been tricked and some people are willingly ignoring that and bending over backwards to defend a adjudicated sexual offender and multi-strike felon, whilst preaching about criminals who happen to be immigrants. If the real Yeshua Christos, to come back to that pin on the corkboard, it's a theme of mine, because I've got things to say, friends, as someone that was brought up in the church. And it's hilarious because I get approached by people who are self-proclaimed some variety of Christian and also now, self-identifying as a Trump supporter of some degree or another. And there are levels. Not all people who vote for Trump are self-proclaimed MAGA. And there's levels to that, right? Not all MAGA are QAnon. I don't even know if that's still going or not. They sort of hype themselves as still going the way the non-MAGA QAnon still does. But all I see is fancy memes and fear-mongering videos that don't offer any real solutions. And I've never seen any real solutions. And they never take it from either MAGA Anon or not MAGA Anon. Like, what is going on with that? So many pins on the corkboard, and I don't know. I dismiss the multiple attempts to get recruited by both flavors of the anonymous thing, because I was very, very unclear as to whether or not they were authentic to any real movement. It was very difficult for me to verify, and they were very unwilling to facilitate their side of that verification process. The individuals that were running these scripts, they were very scripty, so who knows, maybe it was a bunch of con artists running a flavor of con that didn't go anywhere. And they were coming at me right around the same time I was peeking on people claiming to be members of the good Illuminati. Comedy Pete, as well as, mind you, this is dead serious, this is really happening. It's sporadically and spread out over years and months, not like days or hours. But like it all kind of sort of went away and hasn't happened to me as much recently, which is interesting. I will laugh if it starts to happen again. But also as well, some people claiming to be the quote unquote not so good Illuminati, but whatever. Having never joined and having always been rebuffed by those doing the recruiting because I dared to think critically for myself during the onboarding process and ask the deep probative questions I've always wanted to ask actual legitimate representatives of those agencies, as if I had my own globally recognized media empire of my own that I hosted my own almost daily, shows about on. And they all end up blocking me. Interesting. I digress. What does that have to do with the election? A lot more than you realize. Now, I'm not accusing the Republican nominees of being that level of fraudulent, but there are also the facts on the ground, which can be easily verified. And so many pins on the corkboard, friends. We've already gone through like detailed lists therein. I'm not one of those. I am here I'm not here to present a narrative. I'm not here running talking points for the Democrats. I am here to acknowledge that when it comes to who I'm going to, quote unquote, give my public discourse support to, I am adamantly anti-Trump. And so far, I've not been persuaded by anyone who is against the only current alternative to Trump for me to be against them also. That do I blindly defend them? Only on one theme, my friends, and that's on the undeniable fact that all women, regardless of anything else, deserve to be defended against nonsense, malarkey, man-driven, man-oriented, mansplaining, chauvinism, sexism, and downright, sexual neglect, abuse, etc. I will defend any woman, even criminals, against that, not against their crimes. If a person who is a woman has committed crimes, I'll be like, there's no excuse for you to say nasty, rude, mean, completely meaningless and irrelevant and obviously sexist things, my friend. So don't. You will get called out on it every time by me. Not because I I do not blindly defend criminals of any type. Curiously, in the real life conversations and in the online virtual discussion that I am monitoring and engaging in on many platforms and on multiple levels, those who are defending Donald J. Trump, who has been adjudicated an actual sexual predator, guilty of committing sexual harassment to the criminal level by a jury of his peers, a man who has legally can be proven because of divorce filings to have cheated on every single one of his wives, often with the woman he was about to marry next, which the Family Values Party is supposed to be against, but curiously just don't care about him. That's not me flinging false accusations. These are all when there are facts on the ground that cannot be denied. The real question is, how can anyone continue to deny them? Especially when the facts on the ground transcend the malarkey that is used to try to dismiss and minimize and defend this guy on every level. Because there's a growing pattern. He did not divest from his corporate holdings. He did indeed overbook himself as president. That alone, never mind foreign nationals from foreign dignitaries, to be polite about it. Foreign agents, but foreign dignitaries who stayed and were repeatedly overcharged. These are not wild accusations. There's been evidence of this throughout. The real problem is, friends, how in the bloody effing impossible cognitive dissonance has this not already come and gone, been settled in a court of law and adjudicated for the criminality that it was? The evidence has been sitting around in front of us since the day we all collectively called it out. Each and every one of us who called it out when he refused to supply his taxes. This is before he got into office. The first time. Didn't want to show his taxes, right? He sued his schools to not show his grades. And then what? He danced and hemmed and hawed and promised and failed and blah, blah, blah. And just, what's the name when you're doing the funky dance on the salt and sand? He just sidestepped his way into everyone's no longer talking about the fact that you are required by law, in order to not be in violation of the emoluments clause, to separate yourself in a meaningful, functional, you're no longer capable of running the company and, influence its decisions, and you're no longer aware of what's happening at the company so that your decisions in office are not unduly influenced. He never did any of that. And he himself overbooked his own security staff on trips that sometimes he didn't even take. This has all been reported out. It's fact. I'm not flinging crazy accusations, and it's hilarious to me when people are like, well, you're just all suffering from the Trump delusional. What is it? What is the acronym? The TDS? No, I'm sorry, friends. It's when a collective group of people who claim to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ bend over backwards to pretend that this multi-time sex offending, shuckster, tax evading, fraudster, who has crashed companies into bankruptcy in order to benefit himself financially, and who has obviously been found guilty on the facts of multiple fraudulent institutes like his university, etc. Like, who clearly, and I'm no expert, and I'm no lawyer, but between me and the Trump team, I bet you I could find a group of lawyers that would, without charging me money, be able to put together the case that proves in a court of law that Trump violated the Emoluments Clause. The question is, why hasn't anyone brought that case? Do I have any lawyers in my audience? Hook a friend up. Let's go. I'll help. I'll learn how to do the research and the paperwork for free. As long as you just pay me a stipend so that I'm not losing money on the gig. Because it's right there. It boggles the mind. Unless you step back and go, oh, right, two wings, one bird. Which I've been saying since, I've been asking, how did we not see that since Reagan was in office? They fight and they foam at the mouth, the two parties. And they punch each other real hard. But so do Punch and Judy in those Punch and Judy puppet shows with sticks and rocks and all kinds of things. And they tear each other apart, limb from limb, poke each other's eyeballs out. Now, I'm not casting aspersions, and I'm not reliant on, you don't need a conspiracy theory. You just need human flaws like ego, hubris, and greed, combined with the flawed political structures that we've inherited over time in this and in every country, right? You don't need imaginary supervillain characters from other dimensions, which is why I'm writing a book about imaginary characters from other dimensions, right? To make fun of that. That's why, every no matter, even when I'm stating hard cold facts, everything I do, all my content can be labeled as parody and comedy for legal reasons, because it's all working MacGuffin in my book series, which is about a fictional creature from another dimension sent here to shame people about the fictional creatures from other dimensions that they pretend to exist, which don't. You don't need them. You just need the inherited flaws of the human species, which arguably there must be some deep spiritual sublimated dimension to. Now, that's a whole nother discussion, which people will tell me is just as crazy to them as I claim the Christian white nationalist issue is to me. That been on the corkboard, talk about comparing apples and oranges right there. But the reason that I am adamantly against Donald J. Trump is not because I have some psychological delusional hatred against the man. If he were a good human being that actually lived according to Christ's teachings and fed the hungry and healed the sick with magical powers, I'd have zero beef with the dude. But he does not do that, and I can prove it. Anyone can. Just follow him around with a video camera. He loves that. Just listen to him talk. He reveals. Even when he's not accusing, it is. I have, because I don't want to sound like someone just echoing the pro Kamala Harris left wing media. I have long avoided the every accusation is an admission line. But holy mother of all that is truly divine, if there was ever been a human being that has made that, what do you call it? That meme a true thing, because memes existed before the internet. But that cliche, that's the word I was reaching for, which is what we called them back in the day when they were living human behaviors that were memed. What a cliche of a man. This cliche of a man just made that cliche a living true thing. And some people want to make him leader of the free world, quote unquote, as we call the office of the presidency of the United States of America for some really narcissistic reason. Pin on the corkboard. That's a whole nother discussion that we need to return to in another episode. I've been rambling on long enough. Friends, the madness will only escalate as we count down 24, 23, 22, 19 days and counting. And as many before me have already called out, the misinformation is flying hot and heavy. And he didn't invent that, okay? I'm not blaming Donald Trump for all misinformation. I'm not blaming, I don't think in absolutist terms. I try to perceive the world as authentically and as realistically as I can, based on my lived experience out there in the real world with actual human beings. And my testing and probative exploration of where the evidence has led me to that which might be considered authentically divine, as opposed to dogmatically religious ideological construct, which is all made up. And everything that is a construct, everything that is ideology, is made up in the imagination. And the imagination can function in two ways, my friends. It can imagine and model and simulate reality for us so that we can engineer beautiful things in accordance with the way reality works, right? Because it takes a lot of imagination to do things like build new things that dynamically set new engineering standards and break old engineering records. And that's something the human species, historically, has proven itself to be pretty darn good at. But that same faculty, and this is where we connect all the dots, dear friends, because we're all using it actively as we engage in our public discourse and our private meditative contemplation, or lack thereof, of our public, what we will propose publicly. Our imagination can function in multiple ways, and we dismiss it, we marginalize our self-awareness of it, we dismiss the significance of it and the importance of it, and it can mislead us and misinform us. The tragic, powerful flaw of the human imagination is that it will project outward the way it does when it knows and understands the true cosmic power of the mathematical languages of the universal constants, which we have dubbed, using words, we have labeled the laws of nature, which can be measured and verified again and again to be true. And maybe our understanding of it may need updating as nuanced comprehension evolves. Sure. Again, never do I want to paint in absolutist brushstrokes. I am adamantly against ingrained, conditioned, absolutist thinking. And I bring that questioning to public discourse about politics. Right? When it comes to that, I see a double-barreled echo chamber in America where these two parties, which are attached, unfortunately, to the same complicated system of many systems, which suffers, unfortunately, from problematic issues of corruption, which I've said before and I will say again, needs nothing more sophisticated than innate human flaws, like hubris and greed and ego and a willingness to bend and or break the rules that we agreed upon. That doesn't mean we should blindly follow all the rules. That would be absolutist thinking. I'm not an absolutist thinker. I'm a relativist. The universe is a relativistic place. We should think with a clear and honest relativistic framework. Donald Trump is not a saint of the Christian heavenly chorus. He is not the incarnate body of divinity. He is a deeply problematic human individual, flawed like any other, flawed like the very people he fearmongers about, who has committed crimes as bad, if not worse, than the theoretical criminals that are all apparently dark and brown-skinned, and from other places that are theoretically not as good as this place because everyone who lives there is dark-skinned. He is as flawed as those and as criminal as anyone that he fearmongers about, my friends. So the question is not which party is superior. That's nonsense. That's a silly joke. Both parties have problematic issues, right? The question is not which party is most righteous and true. That's a nonsensical way to measure anything. The question is not which party does it have authentically, that didn't come out grammatically correct, but the question is not which party does God authentically give his blessing to? Because that God, that cartoon comic book characterization, that humanized, egoified, terrifying and terrified, that petty and angry God from the deeply flawed and obviously problematic text is not a measure by which we should be measuring our politics. And the founding fathers said so. I don't care what anybody else says. And that argument does not come from a good faith argument of following the teachings that Yeshua the Christ actually taught. And I will stand on this hill and not die. Because if Yeshua Christos were to show up today, in the flesh as it were, one of the other problematic issues, and one of the questions I have for anyone foaming at the mouth about Jesus' name and about the will of God, is if he comes back today, why would he look blonde-haired and blue-eyed and pale-skinned, the way many of you all presume and portray? Why wouldn't he return as pure, disembodied, fractal holographic light, which is what he turned into and what he taught us to become? If, like, Buddhists were promising and claiming and marking calendars saying, the Buddha will return on such and such date, and if they had, they don't, but if they had, especially in America, especially not here, but if they did, on a big, important, meaningful, laughable, provably wrong way, the way American and global Christianity does, of saying the Buddha will return on February 11th, 1922, because blah, 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 all the reasons. My first question to them, if they've been doing that and continue to do that every year, year after year, the way to use the broadest bucket and catch-all term of Christianity clearly does in all its various forms and its various flavors and its various interpretations. My first question to them would be, oh really? And when he returns, will he look Vietnamese or Chinese or Japanese or Hindu or Indian, or which, will he look Prussian? Will he look like an Inuit from Alaska? Like, which one will he look like of all the various ones? And why would he look like a person and not a fractal holographic, disembodied, living divine consciousness that can project material reality as it wills, because that's what he turned into. That's what he taught us to become. And I stand on that, for reals, legit. Anybody who calls themselves a Buddhist, let's have that discussion. Now, curiously, there is no American Buddhist political party with a, sociopathic, dissociative, dystopian, and requiring an apocalypse to happen political agenda, attempting to coerce the rest of the country to go along with them hijacking the American enterprise et al. From top to bottom. If we did, I would be adamantly speaking out against that and daring them to contemplate the question, would Buddha agree with you? Or would Buddha be standing here with me going, WTF are you doing in his name? Because that's what I'm doing with Trump and Trumptopian movement. Not because of Trump, but because It is the newest packaging of a long, repackaged, repurposed, recycled BS agenda that is the pseudo-Christian, pseudo-religious, pseudo-ideological, pseudo-ethno-nationalist. And I use the word pseudo because it's because of its constant rebranding and reflavoring. It's just derivative hogwash. And its fundamental principles are malarkey. Like, I'm not calling them silly names. They're just wrong. They're on the wrong side of history. They're on the wrong side of science. They're on the wrong side of facts. They're on the wrong side of Jesus. And thank God we don't live in, what's the name of the country where there is a weird, tyrannical, ethno-nationalist, Buddhist political tyranny going on? Oh, crap, my lexicon is failing. That was not an attempt to sound like anything other than myself. That was an attempt to say the sentence. My English language lexicon vocabulary name place identifying recall system is failing. I made a meme because if I lived there, that's what my entire, it'd be good morning, insert the name of whatever would have been fun to call it. Anyways, they're doing it wrong. And Buddha would be like, WTF are you doing in my name if he came back tomorrow? And he would probably be working openly to lovingly and kindly and charitably disassemble that entire infrastructure, both physically and intellectually, because it does not, in any way, shape, or form, fairly, accurately represent what he taught. That's what I'm about. That's why I'm writing dystopian, future history about everything going wrong and everything, where a tyrannical, intellectually bereft, morally empty, intellectually dishonest, pseudo-religious, ethno-nationalist movement would go in 160 years. What would it become? Join me in exploring that, both as a warning to ourselves now, in the current moment, in the countdown to, all the stereotypes. As the system stands, it's what we can do, is debate these things and try to convince as many people to vote in favor of the politician that will not do the horrible things and is not being supported by the people that want him to do the horrible things. Now, there may be some evidence for the argument that ultimately both parties are deep by the deepest pockets available, if essentially, funded and supported by the same group of people that we would all be struggling to support. But the bigger argument right now is it's how can any of the people who support Donald Trump and what he's the poster child for the Republican Party becoming. He didn't do it. People used him as the handy tool to facilitate what they wanted to do to the Republican Party. And there are Republicans who wanted to go in a slightly different, although not very much better way or direction, that was simultaneously also not about actually doing what Jesus taught. But that's a whole pointless argument that only really has traction within the halls of Republicans arguing about what real Republicans are in the face of the Trumptopian movement, which does not, for its own sake, actually care whether or not its attempt to hijack the Republican Party fully functions in the long run, as long as it survives as a movement. And I ask my questions very seriously, without lowering or stooping myself to the depths that they are willing to lower themselves, which includes, I refuse. I get accused of hating so many people, and it's not. I refuse to use hateful speech. I do want to know how on earth you can continue to support this individual, this ticket, this agenda that is being represented, which is in and of itself deeply problematic. Because it's rooted in a collection of ideologies that eventually spiral into a hateful collection of ideologies that are being hidden. That are not everyone's motivation is rooted in that, but they're all hanging out in the same big tent. And I don't know. I don't pretend to know where Trump actually sits in his heart of hearts. But I do know that when a person seriously, and this is his only statement on the matter that I can find, this is his only clear, quotable statement on the matter. He is, quote, the least racist person in the room. And the room being, I presume, the Republican Party, the big tent. Okay? And if we take that at its face value, it's not a denial. It's what it was that Mr. Waltz said. That's a damning non-denial statement, or whatever it is he said. And it truly, truly is. Ultimately, dear friends, it's irrelevant if Donald Trump wants to sign up to be a member of the KKK or not, because he's willing to be used by them so that they can gain more political power. He's willing to be used by the coalition of hyper-conservative, pseudo-Christian mini movements that all are craven for power and are not following in Christ's footsteps, are not teaching Christ's teachings. And then we can prove that. There's no argument there. Anyone trying to defend that is only fooling themselves. They most certainly would not be fooling the actual Yeshua Christos if he and or she showed up today in their they, them, non-binary, pure, cosmic, fractal, holographic energy form today. They would not be fooled. They would see directly into the heart of all hearts and be like, here's all the things. And I hold myself in that level of regard. I know what stones I'm throwing. And I destroyed my glass house years ago. And I'll stand by that. And it's funny that the only thing anyone's got, the people waving the Trumptopian banners, all they got is nonsense name calling and boilerplate weaponized, often false accusations. All in an attempt to rally themselves to hold firm instead of actually confronting the critical thinking they refuse to do about this completely unqualified and unworthy sham of a human being, right? And I don't say that to be mean. The guy just doesn't exude any authenticity of any kind ever from what I've seen. Mind you, I've never spent any time with him directly. So I only have that, and I'll admit it. If I were to meet him, my opinion may change a little. But I gotta question, how authentic can anyone be who spews verifiable falsehoods as often as he does? And what does it say of a group of people who refuse to acknowledge these measurable, verifiable, confirmable facts on the ground? Especially as they continue to escalate and paint a bigger and bigger and uglier and darker picture that this guy is not what he pretends to be. And that what he accuses others of doing is often what he's trying to distract you from realizing he already did or is planning on doing. And I know their supporters will be like, well, you just sound just like the mainstream media. I'm like, well, it's not my fault if the mainstream media also sees what I see. But I saw this and was saying this before they were. Because I was asking the moment when I was watching it live, when he came down the golden escalator in front of a bunch of people who didn't know if they were supposed to clap or cheer or just stand there They looked like they were bored and didn't know what was going on and didn't know who he was. They did not look like enthusiastic, adoring fans, which they were, it turned out, were exposed as not being because they were being paid to be there, and there were literally newspaper advertisements for it. The moment I saw that, I stood up and started asking questions out loud and to anyone I encountered on social media, and within days, if not weeks, I launched this podcast. Now, the very first few episodes were experiments on video before I realized TikTok worked the way it worked. TikTok may or may not have existed. I certainly was unaware of it at the time. I have no idea when TikTok launched, when it would have been available to download in the United States. So I can't answer that question. But in terms of what's available to listen to here on Sprecher.com, there's a chunk missing, and I apologize. But it goes pretty deep back. And as you can verify for yourself, long before the mainstream media and long after the mainstream media forgot to follow up questions, I've been asking simple, critical, reasoning-based questions about how anyone can support a guy like Donald Trump politically. I just couldn't. And people are like, well, just because you're a Democrat. I'm like, no, I'm not a blind faith Democrat. I never have been. And I can prove that. And if anyone were to accuse me in the same way of being a blind faith Republican, nope, sorry. I can prove to you that I have never been that. I have never believed in blind faithing anything, religiously or politically. And the thing is, it's considered a virtue in this culture, and I do not understand that. And that's how we get millions of people bending over backwards, spewing cut and paste nonsense to defend a person that their very religious idol they claim to believe and understand and follow in the footsteps of would be sitting here going, how can you give this man your money and idolize him more than you even idolize me, and imitate him more than you imitate my own, whilst you call yourselves believers in me? If Jesus were here, the entirety of my questions are founded on that. Jesus would not vote for Trump. Jesus would not wear a MAGA hat. Jesus would not get MAGA tattooed on his forehead. I don't know. There are many ways in which I do not know how to answer what would Jesus do. I don't know. But based on what I do know about the actual teachings of Jesus as they exist and can be found in the oldest non-English translations, non-English writings, like I don't trust the post-Catholic Church, post-Latin. Like, go back and read the academic literature around the most original, oldie, ancient, authentic, in their original languages, which were, curiously, not a lot of Hebrew, mostly Greek and Aramaic. A little bit of Hebrew, sure, especially once you get deep into the Torah, which is before Jesus. But I'm talking about, like, in terms of Gospels, the oldest versions of the Gospel texts, including the Apocrypha, which, if you're ignoring the Apocrypha and you're calling other people sheeple, and you've never read the Apocrypha, get out of here. Right? Like, I have no hatred for anyone and in any flavor, variety, or form of Christianity. I have a lot of questions, because I'm fairly certain if Yeshua Christos and Mary Magdalene came back tomorrow, they would too, based on what was written about them in the most oldest and ancientest and original text that we can really get our hands into. And it's that simple. And Donald Trump and the MAGA Trumpopian movement are leagues away, doing the inverse opposite. And it's not hyperbolic to say that there's a lot of ways that we can accuse every variety, every flavor of Christianity of being an irrational, fear-based manipulative ideology, right? And it would be easily proven to be correct. The fact that, almost universally across all forms of Christianity, you have a almost universal consensus that God is gonna punish you if he doesn't like what you done did in the world, which is a curious thing for an all-loving, all-omnipotent, all-powerful God to do, when he could just heal you instead. Being all-powerful and all, capable of healing, as is proven by various instances of healing miracles throughout. It is very curious, though, that instead of healing the human species, which would seem like the most divinely logical thing, the most divinely beautiful thing, the most divinely inspired thing, the most divinely just and righteous thing, the most divinely all-powerful thing for an all-powerful, divine, and just, and loving, and godly being that created the human species to do. Not to send them to the most toxic and insane and sociopathic sounding hellhole, like to use its own derogatory sidebar term on itself. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? And no matter how you slice it, friends, the problem I've got with American political ideology is when anybody on any quadrant of the political spectrum starts talking about merging religion, especially apocryphal, because it is, and those are two different uses of apocrypha. There's the apocrypha in the Gospels, which are very interesting and insightful, and then there is the blatantly apocryphal in real terms, like the bastardization of Christ's teachings in its newly, weirdly violent, like Rambo Jesus is alive, folks. Let's not get hung up on my multi-directional use of apocrypha. There is the traditionally labeled apocrypha. They were labeled as such because the oldie-timey leaders of the ancient church, which didn't want any Christians reading this stuff, used fear-mongering to label it as bad and evil. You should be afraid of it. Don't read it. It's going to fuck with you. Whenever any religious authority figure that has political power tells you to not read a book, the first thing I do is go try and read it. Especially if it's a Christian thing, right? But like a perfect example of all of this, it boils down to this. I've used it before, I'll use it again. It is a central pin. It is a central pillar of everything I do in terms of my public discourse criticism and sometimes attempts to be funny, which qualify as satire and comedy, to poke fun at the elite pseudo, because they fail to be good Christians, in my opinion, pseudo-Christians, especially when they mingle and or are self-identifying openly as ethno-nationalists of any kind, but the white nationalists especially. But any ethno-nationalism of any flavor is inherently suspicious as being like, wait, what? What? That doesn't sound healthy or good on so many levels. And historically, I don't think has bared out to end up being a particularly awesome way to go. And no matter how you slice it, folks, I keep coming back to this. I don't pretend to speak for the divine entity. I just, having spent a lifetime deeply contemplating the actual teachings of and observing the contradictory behavior out there in the political sphere, I have a high degree of confidence that if the divine being that we commonly refer to with the singular name Jesus were to turn up today, they would turn up with Magdalene because they are counterparts, and having elevated and enlightened themselves and achieved transdimensional transmutation, aka heavenly ascension, would come back as polymorphic, divine, disembodied, ghost-like, maybe, and I don't like that term, fractal holographic light consciousness beings. And they could probably then modulate everything to appear in very flesh-like flesh pods to prove that they are who they are. And they would, A, look Palestinian, not anything else, and most definitely not Caucasian by any stretch of the imagination. And they would probably, and I would be very sad to discover if I were dead wrong, immediately set upon questioning anything and everything being done in their names. Because to do anything in the name of Christ is to potentially blaspheme, is it not? According to their own rules, which they often don't understand. Which is why I stand united against Trump with the coalition of those that are engaging to ensure that he does not ascend once more to the penultimate position of political power in the United States of America. Not for any of the crazy made-up reasons, which there are flowing about, but for the factual reasons, not the least of which being, if you truly understand the actual non-manipulated, terminologies of the Bible, he openly qualifies as the Antichrist. Like, he checks all the boxes. And I'm not into that kind of fear-mongering. I would never brainlessly, because someone else told me to, call him the Antichrist. And I'm not trying to, in this instance, use that label. But if you go down the list, and then you actually, truthfully, honestly review how he has behaved since he ascended into political power, problematic at best, my friends. And thus, all of these issues, the Russia connection, and I know they just want, everything's just a hoax, everything's just the delusional hatred, everything is just the evil cabals plotting against him, because it couldn't possibly be the other way around. That he was a liar and a political shyster and a political con artist that got away with it. That's physically impossible. Except for the facts on the ground, my friends. And I refuse to bend the knee. I refuse to bend the knee. And it's not a matter of agree to disagree. Because regardless of whether Trump himself understands it or not, it is clear from my perspective that his handlers intend to utilize him and his potential return to power to implement a political, religious, ethno-nationalist agenda that I cannot abide by. And I would rather see it preemptively blocked by having anybody else that isn't half as problematic as he is win, so that we can then try to return the conversation to the normalcy of, let's hold our politicians accountable within the confines of, we don't have to worry about them being pseudo-white nationalists ever at all, who want to implement something as crazy as what the Heritage Foundation and their pseudo-ethno-white nationalist fellows have come up with in Project 2025. It's that serious. And it's going to take a lot longer than just however long Kamala Harris stays in office, which theoretically should only be 2 terms. And should she, during the course of her term of office, begin to behave in such a way that it bothers my moral compass as much as Trump does, I will gladly open up and engage in the political critique and questioning in the way that I have. But I will not tolerate the weaponized, false, empty malarkey accusations from Democrats either, should it come to that, that the Trumptopians to use the grammatically correct term that I hope will finally gain traction, because it is not a derogatory term. Trumptopians are just people who are predominantly former Republicans and or former hyper-conservative independents that have assumed and adopted the Mod Podge, previously very disorganized but increasingly more like well-defined collection of ideological agendas or constructs that collectively can be described by the MAGA, QAnon, Trumptopian, and previously sort of unnamed The Family-esque, because there's several groups like The Family. Pin on the corkboard if you've never heard of The Family. What are you arguing? Who are you defending if you don't know that you're defending the family inherently by defending the Republican Party even before Trump got involved? And you don't know that. Then you need to slow your roll and do a little bit of, dare I, God forbid, use the word research. And by research I mean like read a real book written by someone who doesn't already spew the same things you inherently agree with at church. And on that note, friends, I will leave you because I've rambled on long enough. The countdown is only just picking up steam. The misinformation is going to fly faster and harder and crazier. It is encouraging to see, I'll leave this on a final note, that even Republican politicians are stepping up to fact check and call out Trump's nonsense because he is crossing lines. Curiously, it's about hurricane response stuff, which has its own problematic issue independent of Trump in regards to the nexus of crazy disinformation, because it's a cornucopia of many different things. There is no one coherent thesis in the denialist camp. There's a incoherent and unregulated, not that it needs to be regulated by government, but rather that they themselves have never done any coherence check within their own camp. The camp of people at a global scale that are denying climate change, deny it in a mutually conflicting various, set of ways, and are reliant on a set of conspiracy theories that, as I've repeatedly tried to point out, may have some truth to them, but inherently fail to pass the test of where's the solutions and what is the point? And does it refrain from targeting others and trying to trick you into hating them? If your religion, if your politics, if your societal ideology, if your cultural ideology, if any club or group or tribe that you belong to has ideological tenets that lead you down a path of, I gotta hate these group of people over there because, then you might want to stop and question the groups you belong to first. Especially if you don't even know those people over there. Especially if you've never met any of those people over there and the claims against them you personally cannot prove. My dander's still up about the whole wave of nonsense, which they've stopped arguing about. They just give up arguing. They get shown facts, and they call the facts lies, and then they shake it off, and they move to a new shiny collection of weaponized accusations. Let me end on this, because people always ask me this. It's the first knee-jerk question. Why are you blindly defending the leftists who represent all these horrible things? I'm not. Anyone who's been proven to be truly criminal must be held to account. My problem and continued critique with the right is they keep bringing these hyperbolic accusations against the left and then failing to bring the vast plurality of them to account in a court of law. And curiously, the left does a way better job. Who is holding the certain hip-hop artist to account for his blatant, actual criminal behavior, which is right in the sweet spot of what the right constantly accuses the left of doing, like blindly. They'll accuse anybody. I've been accused of doing it, which is horrifying. Because I can, in good conscience, and without losing a wink of sleep, tell you I've never done anything that either Mr. Diddy or Mr. Epstein have engaged in doing. Curiously, though, Trump is very weirdly close with both of them. Something that the blind faith Trump supporters will just go, no, it can't be true. It must be CGI. But there keeps being actual measurable evidence that comes out from courts of law where they vetted the evidence and theoretically proved it to be not those things. Now, until the point comes that the radical right proves with actual facts that can be vetted and verified and proved and will stand up in a court of law without relying on legal shenanigans that Trump is known for, the kind of legal shenanigans that the Republican Party is known for, like gerrymandering and redefining things so that they're not illegal instead of just holding people to account for doing those things. Obviously, the Democrats have done a little bit of some of those things too, because no party is perfect, and I'm not defending them blindly. I call out anyone for blindly defending any political party. There are problematic individuals and problematic themes on both sides. What I do not tolerate is weaponized false accusations. We do not need to make up stories about people and then blindly pass them along. We do need to investigate anyone who wants to ascend to positions of power and vet them better. I have always been an investigate them all kind of guy. It's that simple. And I assure you, Donald Trump would not survive that. He is unqualified for office. And in terms of what he and his followers have accused the opposing ticket of supposedly being involved in, I'm not seeing it. I have yet to see it. And they keep failing. Trump and the most hardcore of the election deniers have continually lost in a court of law, not for crazy radical leftist judges preventing them from doing stuff, as they've falsely sometimes claimed, but if anyone bothers to read the transcripts, but from being unable to provide evidence to satisfy the court in every instance, often with sitting Republican judges, some of which, in some cases, were appointed by Trump himself. The only one who seems to be bending over backwards to blatantly work in a very questionably favorable way towards Trump is what's-her-name out of Florida. But she also gets her hand smacked occasionally by other courts and other judges, and she's getting a lot of critique from her own party for some of the degree to which she has tried to bend the rules. His claim that he is the most unfairly treated president of all time is laughable. He has been treated with kid gloves, with a presumption of innocence that goes beyond kenning, beyond my ability to ken, which is a real word. I'm not using the name ken, I'm using the phrase beyond ken. Beyond my understanding. And he's still walking around free to openly spew what can only be described as half-truths, mostly not truth, things that have a little bit of kind of sort of truthiness to them, and then blatantly false weaponized accusations at anyone who dares question him. His behavior is untrustworthy in and of itself. His flaws are overwhelming on the facts alone. And it is unbelievable that if Christ were to show up, he would worship that guy, or that he would vote for him, or that he would adulate him the way Trump supporters do. Trump is not going to turn out to be a reincarnated saint, as some people continue to insist to this day. And we need to stop with the political glorification. No politician in any party is worthy of being glorified and turned into an idol. Period. They should be elected based on how eligible they actually are for office and how free of problematic backgrounds and criminal conflict of interest they physically, actually, confirmably can prove themselves to be. If we want to have a big, long, complicated discussion about what kinds of reform to the election process at the federal level, on the state level, on the county level, we should have that as a nation and as a community of many communities. But we should stop with this hyperbolic, echo chamber, wedge issue driven nonsense, petty BS that just gets reduced to playground alley bullying. And I'm looking at anybody on any side for defending any politician in any party that ends up resorting to doing so. And we must all stand united. If there was ever an era for people to transcend political party and stand united against all those who welcome, embrace, casually issue, or openly defend the use of political violence or the threats thereof. Like what? No, that is a hard line boundary. We don't live in the Wild West. We aren't Vikings. And that doesn't mean that we've become weak men. It just means that too many people want to perpetuate sociopathy as a measurement of manhood. And that's a whole problematic issue in and of itself. We can have a 2-hour TED Talk about, friends. Believe me, friends, I'm not here to preach hate. I'm here to preach the fact that the human species must step up to its responsibility to heal itself. And that requires a lot of discipline, a lot of compassionate, loving, forgiving discipline, as Yeshua taught, as Magdalene taught, as Buddha taught, and as everyone else. I'd just like to stop with those three because it's controversial enough. I don't want to go aggravating others any more than I have to. They'll get to it. They'll discover me eventually. We'll get to it as a discourse flow eventually. If the human species doesn't radically reduce its probability of survival through mindlessly bashing its face against the same brick wall whilst insisting on whipping the same set of dead horses over and over and over again, we can finally abdicate and liberate our minds, hearts, and spirits from these toxic, dead-end, blind faith ideologies that are irrelevant because they are not laws of nature. They are not truths that must be beholden. They are just made up axioms that became thought patterns and became so sublimated that people believed without thinking in them as if they were powers to be manifest in the world. They're not. We can radically change all these things for our mutual benefit without abusing one another if we choose to. But we never will succeed in achieving that if we do not confront one simple reality first, and that's that we must continue to contend with the system as it is, and before we dismantle the system or fix the system or reform the system, we must each step up ourselves and encourage each other to step up to the mutual engagement of holding ourselves accountable for our own long-neglected spiritual trauma that is the only measurable, verifiable, confirmable, actual source of all the problematic issues that we deal with, instead of making up cartoon characters and fear-mongering and targeting and falsely accusing the most marginalized, otherified groups of people on this planet and blaming them. Thank you for joining me, friends. Until next time, I've been your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and that's what I got to say about what's going on in our world today. Join me as we count down towards Election Madness 2024.
And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily Zencast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.
And a quick final thought, friends. Whether you're mocking me and laughing and thinking of all the ways you're going to troll me online, please bring it. And make sure you come to Sprecher.com/user/Mr. Zeppo to drop your trolling comments directly under each episode. Please and thank you. Or you feel encouraged and inspired because some of this actually makes sense to you. Or you're somewhere in the middle and you're confused and triggered and activated. What I hope you are inspired to do, beyond engaging and asking questions and dropping your comments and thoughts on this podcast episode here and on all my social media. More importantly, while that is important because it'll help me as I'm trying to turn this into my online work from home social media content creation, monetized hustle. And if what's his name and what's her face and all those other guys in the right wing extremophobia end of the spectrum can do it, then why the F can't I? But more importantly, I hope you are left with a little bit of inspiration and tingling curiosity to turn inward and heal thyself. As scary and as daunting and as overwhelming as that may sound, may you bring yourself closer to doing that, baby step by baby step at a time. Look within, my friend, and heal thyself.